Once again, we welcome you to Moving Forward with Young Voices. We're very happy to welcome a new contributor to the program today. Jacob Fox is joining us. Jacob, very happy to have you on the show. Take a moment, if you would, and just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thank you for having me on the show. So I'm currently a junior studying economics at Hillsdale College. I've spent the past semester in DC doing an internship with an organization called America's Future. We work on professional development for young conservatives or just people trying to get into the liberty movement. So I'm excited to be a contributor here at Young Voices.
Now, you were telling me as we were getting ready to go on the air here that one of the things you do like about the Beltway area, I mean, there's good and there's bad there, but you said one of the better things about it is when it comes to getting around, it's actually not too hard with public transportation as well as with bicycle lanes. And specifically, we're going to be talking about bicycle lanes. So where do we begin on a subject like this?
Well, the interesting thing about bicycle lanes is for the longest time in America, there was not much of a priority to build them. It was there's a big movement in the 50s to build all of these roads, make everything really connected for cars, especially connecting suburbs to these downtown areas. But then what we see in more recent time is people understanding that there should be a little bit more of a focus on making all modes of transportation viable for people, depending on what their preferences are. However, one of the key issues to this is a lot of city planners have looked at some of the local regulations that have come out and said, hey, we can just paint some lines on the road, and those lines are going to be sufficient to kind of build this cycling community and keep cyclists safe. But one of the key things that we've learned as the data has come in over the past 20 or so years, as these new bike lanes have sprung up, is that we actually have an increase in bicycle injuries and in some cases deaths as well, because cars and drivers are either not used to seeing cyclists or looking out for cyclists, and just a simple painted line is not enough to protect them. So really what is great to see, especially in the DC area, is there are things like these concrete curbs or reflective pylons, or just, it doesn't even have to be something major, but it's something that at least tells drivers, hey, here's where your lane is, here's where the cyclists are, just be aware that there's other people on the road.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to ask you, is how can they make it safer? But what you point out is correct. And as I think, as I've been around and in, large cities where there are bike lanes, sometimes it's not perfectly clear, who has the right to be there. Obviously, cyclists are doing their best to stay within there, but sometimes drivers just simply think it's another lane for their convenience too, and they're not in the habit of looking for those two wheels.
And that's something also really interesting when you look at the psychology of commuters. Is there's a phenomenon in city planning where whenever you actually remove signage or you remove certain markings, people become more aware of their surroundings because they have to be. So in a really extreme example is sometimes in Europe, you'll see these areas where there'll be a large intersection where there'll be pedestrians, bicyclists, vehicles, and they remove all road markings. Like there's no lane markings, there's no stop signs. And the idea is drivers become hyper aware when they enter these environments to look out for the people around them. Now, on the flip side of that, if you have this hyper over signage where every place has a stop sign, every lane has a specific marking, sometimes and I'm guilty of this too, you just enter into autopilot mode. You're like, I'm just going to drive down the street. And part of what just having an unprotected white lane on the side of the road does to drivers is lets them know, okay, I no longer have to look out for cyclists. And from the cyclist point of view, they are conversely thinking, I have my own lane, therefore I'm safe from drivers. And so you have this weird valley effect where if you don't have any markings, then cyclists are aware of the drivers are aware of the cyclists. And then, you have this dip of kind of, it's dangerous whenever everyone thinks that everyone's aware of each other, but they're actually not. And then on the other side of the safety spectrum, you have, there's a clear division between cycle lanes and road lanes. And that means that everyone is still aware of each other while, remaining safe in the process.
Now, I have to admit, when you first say, taking the signage away, it sounds very counterintuitive. But as you describe it, it sounds to me like what it's doing is it's putting the responsibility squarely back on the shoulders of both the cyclists as well as the drivers. which it turns out is kind of where it needs to be in the first place, right?
Yeah, and another important element to this that I think sometimes is overlooked whenever people are adding cycle lanes into roads is ideally the speed of the cyclist should roughly match the speed of the vehicle. So another issue that you have whenever new bike lanes are put in is they're putting bike lanes on these 45, 50 mile per hour roads. So the bicyclists are going 25, 30 miles per hour. The cars are going by them at near twice that speed. And that mismatch is just like a recipe for disaster. And I mean, even as a driver myself, there's also that weird feeling of trying to pass a cyclist that's going slower in front of you. I mean, it's kind of an uncomfortable situation for everyone. So ideally, cycle lanes are put in roads that match that speed limit. So instead of putting them on the main boulevard, put them on a street right next to the boulevard that has, a 25, 30 mile per hour speed limit. So that way everyone's kind of going the same speed, everyone's staying on the same page. And like you said, taking that personal responsibility to be aware of the people that are around.
So are there any cities in the U.S. that are doing an exceptionally good job of accommodating, bicyclists in a way that's beneficial to both the motorists as well as the cyclists?
Yeah, I mean, as I talk about in my article, really the gold standard to look at right now is Minneapolis, Minnesota. It currently ranks the highest in bicycle safety, at least as of 2021. And what's really interesting to look at with the statistic is the ratio of protected bicycle lanes versus non-protected bicycle lanes. So for instance, Miami, Florida has roughly the same amount of miles of bike lanes as Minneapolis does. However, it ranks as one of the most dangerous cities for cyclists. Now, the reason you're like, well, they have the same number of bicycle lanes, why is it that one is the safest and one is the least safe? Well, it actually comes down to the amount of protected bike lanes. So Minneapolis has, I think, just about 50% of their bike lanes that are protected, or even in some cases, as the gold standard, completely removed from the road. They have their own space. They're not just, tacked on to, the side. We call them like gutter bike lanes because they oftentimes overlap with like the drainage in the street. And so the fact that, these bicyclists get their own space, they, have these curbs or these reflective pylons to separate them from drivers, has dramatically increased bicyclist safety and has just seen, continued positive effects.
I'm sure you've probably seen the clip of a bicyclist who set out to prove just how easily the bike lanes are ignored. And the guy just basically is riding through a big city and he will just plow into whoever or whatever stopped or blocking the bike lane. Now he's not doing it, in a destructive way, but he's trying to make a point. And I guess unless you're actually on a bicycle every so often, it might be easy to forget that that's a shared space.
Yeah, and I mean, you see this all the time with, cars using bicycle lanes as extra parking or, and they might necessarily have bad intentions, but I mean, what you're making the cyclists do is, get out of their lane into, the flow of traffic. So, both the cyclist is unaware of, necessarily any traffic that's coming through. Drivers are not necessarily expecting it because they have not had to worry about cyclists for the entire duration of their traveling on the road. So it just shows the importance of changing these small things that can greatly impact the safety of everyone around them.
Jacob, I have to ask: does cost become a determining factor in how these cities deal with bike lanes? Is it a lot more expensive, or even mildly more expensive, to do it the right way, the safer way, than it is to just paint some lines and say, there you go?
Well, part of what I try to tackle in my article is the idea that cities have a specific budget for bike infrastructure. And a lot of times that's given via federal grants from the Department of Transportation that wants to meet climate goals. And part of the issue is they simply put that money into creating more unprotected bike lanes. And so the argument that I make is, hey, instead of creating more unprotected bike lanes, how about we use that same money to just protect some of the existing bike lanes? Because I feel like that would do more good than creating more of these just unsafe painted gutters. But the other thing too is a lot of times these federal dollars are earmarked, and that's part of kind of our infrastructure financing issue that I think we should look at revising is what are the incentives that city planners have to build things that are unnecessary with taxpayer money just because, the Department of Transportation has set these very specific guidelines that don't fit to the specific city.
Again, we are talking with Jacob Fox. He is a Young Voices contributor. And Jacob, for the sake of those who would like to follow your work or connect with you on social media, where's the best place to find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Jacob A. Fox. That's probably the easiest one. I keep all of my articles that I publish up to date there. So I appreciate you following.
Okay. Man, it's good to talk to you. This tempts me to dust off my bicycle and maybe get out there and get some exercise. Now, I live in a rural setting, which, believe it or not, is even more dangerous for cycling. That's because we have big farm trucks going up and down the road, but I guess I could always go to the city and ride. What do you think? Thanks again.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Welcome back. This is our second segment of Moving Forward with Young Voices today, and we are welcoming back a familiar voice to the program. His name is Aviv Nathanael Phipps. Nate, good to catch up with you once again. How are you?
Doing great. Thanks for having me again, Brian.
So for people meeting you for the first time, let's take just a moment here, let you introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so I am a digital communications professional based in Arlington, Virginia. Been a part of the freedom movement for a while now. And I'm also hopefully up and coming independent part-time journalist writing on things from foreign policy, Israel-Palestine, topics like that.
Well, you've touched on one of my favorite topics, and that is radio. I go back a ways. I think I started my radio career, it'll be 40 years ago this December. And I kind of have this idea that, well, it's a digital world. We didn't have the internet then, so everything has changed. But you make a very strong case in your article that, no, radio is still quite relevant. In fact, it's really crucial that America have what you call spectrum supremacy when it comes to radio. Let's talk a little bit about the role that radio plays in our modern world and why it's so important that we don't just, designate it as a museum item.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of the overarching term is spectrum radio waves. And it refers to the radio waves that our Wi-Fi comes through, that are 5G, and hopefully down the road 6G will come along. So even though it's not, your old school radio that might be playing in your car anymore, it's a wide variety of communication technology, and it is a limited resource. There are only so many frequencies that we can broadcast on. And how things work kind of on the government side is the FCC used to have the authority to allow licensing for corporations on specific frequencies. And that lapsed last year due to congressional neglects. And so we're kind of in this place to where new licenses can't be issued for unused frequencies, allowing innovation and building up our sort of communication economy and remaining competitive with China and other foreign entities. And it's hurting our ability to remain competitive.
Interesting. I tend to think of the radio wave spectrum as being virtually unlimited. So it's always a little bit sobering to hear that, no, there's a limited amount of bandwidth there that can be used. Talk to me about innovation. Obviously, some things have changed, and I presume will continue to change. Is there any hope, or is there anything in the near future that could further expand that spectrum, or are we simply limited by the laws of physics to what is?
No, there actually are a number of frequencies that are not in use, and Senators Thune and Cruz last month, before the Spectrum Pipeline Act, in order to reestablish the FCC's authority to auction off licenses. And a lot of your listeners might not be a huge fan of, government oversight here. Neither am I. But the reality is right now that corporations need to have exclusive access to these radio waves. It's kind of like back when you had dial-up, and if you were on the internet and one of your family members had to make a call, someone had to get off. So really, businesses need that exclusive rights on these channels. It's sort of a tragedy of the commons, so to speak. And this Spectrum Pipeline Act aims to restore the FCC's ability to auction off new licenses to businesses, and also to reappropriate some frequencies from military use over to private use, so that those are freed up for businesses to do what they do best, to innovate.
Interesting. And are there some frequencies that remain unregulated? I mean, I remember for instance, the little two-way radios we'd pick up, if we were going to some event, wanted to stay in touch with family members. You didn't have to have a license for that. Is that likely to continue, or are we approaching a point where people are going to have permission or some kind of licensure to use the frequencies that are available?
Well, there are definitely still frequencies that are available unlicensed, and it's kind of described as like the Wild West of radio communications. It's just everyone's on there, so there's so much interference that it's just not, sometimes things don't come through in a way that's actually useful. So yes, there still will remain channels that are going to be unused for the foreseeable future. At some point we may have to reconsider how we go about this. It might be the case to where there is so much demand as the population grows that there's more channels needed than we have, and we'll have to rethink the whole thing at that point. But for the time being, we're not there yet.
So I have to ask, the highest demand frequencies, would that be the ones, for instance, that, wireless Wi-Fi is transmitted on?
I think 5G and eventually 6G are going to be really big demand. That's what's needed to power our cell phones and to power other types of communication technology. A huge aspect of it is also cybersecurity and our ability to remain competitive in that field. This, not only has commercial and economic impacts, it potentially has cybersecurity impacts, the ability of our military to be able to communicate with itself in operations. So as things heat up all over the world, there are potentially going to be more conflicts. We need to remain competitive so that we can continue to promote our own national security.
Yeah, I assume that's probably something, unless you're inside the national security community, probably most of us don't think about that. We just want to know, why is my 5G coverage so slow, or why is my Wi-Fi so slow? As far as commercial applications, though, is this one of those cases where, even though there is government oversight and there's been regulation, you mentioned that the FCC auctions had stopped it, but does money talk? If you have enough money, does that get you access, or are there other considerations that come into play?
Yeah, so in theory, when the FCC does have its authority, it does auction off these channels. So I imagine that your money does make you competitive in your ability to secure those channels at auction. Another aspect is that the Biden administration is not doing a whole lot to try to resolve this issue. Last year, they released a report that said that they were looking into the matter. They were doing research. Again, they released a very similar report this year, to where the can is just being kicked down the road. And so there's not a whole lot of plan there from the executive branch to move this forward. So, it's really important that this act goes forward and that the FCC's authority here is reestablished.
So what do they have to gain by not moving on it, by dragging their feet?
I am not sure what the motivation is of the executive branch, but I think it's an election year. I think this is just not an issue that a lot of people know or care about, but we should. Whereas people are very focused on student loans and other issues, foreign policy, Israel-Palestine. So I think the administration is prioritizing things that will gain them votes and goodwill in the coming election.
And maybe what it would take for people to care about this, is to see a complete interruption in their cellular coverage, or a complete interruption in their Wi-Fi. I don't remember. My kids were watching a show the other day, and the way that everybody's attention was suddenly taken was the Wi-Fi shut off, and the whole world just kind of went into a tizzy. But is it going to take something like that for people to realize that, yeah, they do have an interest in this?
Well, I certainly hope not, but the way things are going, we might get to that place.
Where, first of all, What's a good resource in terms of people who want to become better informed on this subject? Where can they go to find good, reliable information?
Well, at my at the op-ed that I wrote at International Policy Digest, I linked out to a number of different resources. One that goes into a little bit more of the science behind this. It is a little nuanced, and I didn't get fully into the op-ed. But if you want to learn more about the science of radio waves, there's an article there. Both Senator Cruz and Thune have released statements on the Spectrum Pipeline Act as well that were very informative.
Again, we are talking with Aviv Nathanael Phipps. Nate, great to hear from you. Where can people find you on social media?
If you look me up on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook at just Nathanael Phipps.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Hey, we are happy to welcome a new contributor for this segment. Her name is Cait Dexter. Cait, great to have you on the program. Take a moment, if you will, and just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Hi, Brian. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Cait Dexter. I have been working in the liberty movement and a grassroots activist for about 10 years, advocating for issues like educational freedom.
Excellent. And that's a topic that's near and dear to my heart, only because in my home state of Idaho, we have just tried to get educational freedom and educational choice passed, and it seems like it just dies on the vine each legislative session. So I'm anxious to have this conversation. I'm looking at an article you wrote for the Washington Examiner. The headline, "No, School Choice is Not a Leftist Trojan Horse." This is the first year that I've actually started hearing some rumblings like that, but doesn't that mean then that we're seeing some opposition to school choice coming from conservative corners for a change?
So we've long seen pushback from the left on this issue, and as it's become more of a bipartisan support, we've also seen some new bipartisan pushback. Ironically, the complete opposite of the opposition we hear from the left, but conservatives, who have often been the biggest supporters of this issue, are starting to have some concerns.
So what exactly is it that is coming from conservative circles that makes them say this is a Trojan horse? What's the downside that they see to educational choice?
The opposition to school choice has really tapped into conservatives' fears of government control. So ironically, the pushback on the left is that school choice is the first step to fully eliminating public schooling. And on the right, it's now that it is the first step to full government control of all educational facets.
Like including homeschooling?
Yes, sir.
Wow. That's quite a leap. So I have to ask, obviously there are many people on the political right who are very much for school choice. What corners of the political right are starting to sound this alarm that this could just be a way to give government control over all education, including that outside of the public school system?
We're really tapping into homeschooling families' fears. They are currently benefiting from school choice, and opposition has said, any bill regarding homeschooling that supports these issues is actually just a way for the government to get their hands on it and control it. There's not really any legitimate basis for these, but they're really pushing into their fears because it's an issue so many people are so passionate about, and they care so much about their children's education. So it's very easy to manipulate people's emotions regarding the issue.
And we've seen that over and over, not just in my home state of Idaho, but I've seen this in many other states. Now, nevertheless, there has been some pretty significant progress on the educational choice front. I've seen more and more states sign into law, various educational choice measures. Do we have enough history now, enough of a track record that we can look to what's happened with some of those states and say, look, the data shows, or the record shows here, that it's not the case of this? This is laying the groundwork for, a federal takeover of education.
Absolutely. And that is primarily the main reason we are seeing such pushback from the opposition, is because across the nation, we are seeing more and more legislation on educational freedom, pushing forward some of these education initiatives. And in the states that have passed these types of laws, Utah, Florida, we're seeing their educational statistics rise. These are some of the states that are improving the most in terms of education.
Talk to me about Missouri. It sounds like this was particularly a contentious topic there. I saw the phrase state heroin, and I thought, wow, that can't be good if somebody's using that to describe educational choice. What was the story there in Missouri?
So the state heroin referred to an email that some groups sent out about a specific bill in Missouri, Senate Bill 727. This was my first experience seeing the pushback was in the state of Missouri, but I've heard of it across a couple of other states now. But they had a great education savings account bill that now has, since the article was published, been passed in the House and the Senate. They're just waiting for the governor to sign it. But the opposition from the state of Missouri was primarily the teacher unions and some far-right conservatives who were pushing the idea that this was government wanting to get their hands on homeschooling.
Interesting. I guess this is human nature, right? Something can always be taken to an extreme. Is this a case of the perfect being the enemy of the good in the minds of those on the right who are pushing against this?
Definitely. That was a big issue with this specific bill. There are some stipulations that came with the tax credit. It's a fully voluntary tax credit. No homeschooling or private school family is required to enroll in the program, but if they did, the current bill does have some stipulations regarding standardized testing that the groups who are in support of the bill would like to see removed next legislative season. But a big pushback was because there are some stipulations, we can make no progress in regards to educational freedom.
So it's all or nothing.
Yes.
Yep, I've seen that in other issues as well, and I'm not one to say, hey, you should compromise on everything, but this is one of those issues where it's clear that getting a toehold is better than jumping to the very top of the mountain you're climbing, and it sounds like it's kind of a process. Talk to me about the principles on which school choice is based, lest people forget what's at stake, what's really behind the whole school choice movement.
The whole point of the school choice movement is getting parents more involved in their children's education. It's giving them the rights to the best education that their students need. Each student has their own needs in regards to education. There is not a one-size-fits-all. And if your local public school works for 80% of the population, that is great, but we still care about the 20% of children who might benefit from a different type of schooling. It's the free market at work, and it's the best for all when we raise those opportunities.
I think one of the best explanations I've also heard is, the difference here is it's allowing funding to follow the students toward the best educational outcome for the student, as opposed to what we see here in Idaho, where whenever the school choice matter comes up, it's like you said, it's treated as, well, this is just a stake in the heart of public education, and this is all about destroying it. And so it's like there can be no competition. If you want choice, you have to have it within the public system or nothing else. And it just seems like it's about the system rather than the student.
Exactly. And when we open up that competition and have other alternatives, in most cases, we've seen that the public schools actually perform better because of that competition.
Which makes sense, right? I mean, we all do better when we've got somebody competing against us. And I don't know. It seems like the teachers' unions, at least in my home state, seem to be, one of the biggest obstacles to overcome. But also, it seems like there are a lot of politicians, and I mean, even, ostensibly the conservative ones, who've kind of staked their claim to, we've got to protect this system at all costs, and they just don't seem open to alternatives. What have you seen that's worked in other states that has helped maybe some of those dead enders realize that offering an alternative path is not the end of the system that they're trying to defend?
I think it comes down to making those paradigm shifts in the small incremental movements. A lot of states don't currently have open enrollment. So if your local public school isn't working for your child, I heard a very concerning story of a child who was getting bullied and committed or attempted suicide in their locker room. And because their state did not have open enrollment and the family could not afford to send the child anywhere else, they had to go to that same public school instead of one that was 5 minutes down the road. It's making those small law shifts so that way we can see big changes overall.
Wow. Well, I feel encouraged after hearing you describe this. I mean, I'll admit, I've kind of had a long face the last couple of legislative sessions as I've watched school choice not only go down in flames, but this time it was a bill that sat in the drawer of one particular legislator who decides whether or not to call it up for a vote in the first place, and it just sat there. It was like it never saw the light of day and died for lack of attention. So it sounds like there are some formulas that are working. Are there any states that you're keeping an eye on as far as the next ones to lead out in terms of educational choice?
My eyes are still currently on Missouri and hoping the governor signs that bill. If not, and even if it does, we will be back next session to get rid of some of those stipulations and push school choice even further. Florida, I think, is always a great example of school choice. That's my home state. They're not perfect, but they're definitely leading the way in terms of educational freedom.
I'm so glad to hear you say that. I mean, it really is. It's, the people who think that it's got to be perfect, we can't have the slightest bit of, anything we don't want, they need to read your article and think about it before moving forward. Again, we're talking with Cait Dexter. Cait, where can our audience find you, either on social media or where can they follow your work?
Thanks. People can find me on Twitter at Cait R. Dexter, CaitRDXTR, or LinkedIn at Cait Dexter. I'd love to continue the conversation there.
Okay. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next time we get to visit.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Welcome back. This is our fourth and final segment of Moving Forward with Young Voices today. I am happy to welcome a new contributor. Her name is Martyna Smółka, and she is joining us today to talk about a topic involving technology. But before we go there, Martyna, would you take just a moment to tell our listeners just a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what you do?
Yes, certainly. I'm very happy to talk to you today. I'm Martyna Smółka, and I come from Poland. I'm a graduate of the Warsaw School of Economics and an author in the areas of social policy, healthcare, and economics. I've worked with Mercatus Center in Washington, and I'm now a policy fellow with Young Voices. And privately, on the other hand, I'm a wife and soon-to-be mom.
Congratulations. And I mean, on all counts, it's wonderful to have you as a contributor as well. So I'm reading your article, which was about the blocking of Amazon's iRobot acquisition in Europe. And I will admit, this was not on my radar screen. Can you help us understand, first of all, what is iRobot and why did Amazon want to acquire it? And why did the European Commission say no?
Certainly. The recent decision by the European Commission to block the proposed acquisition of iRobot by Amazon has, as you said, sparked quite a considerable debate. Essentially, the European Commission intervened to thwart the merger, citing concerns about potential anti-competitive behavior and its impact on the robot vacuum cleaner market, which is a market of iRobot. However, many experts and industry insiders have criticized this move, arguing that there is a lack of direct competition between Amazon and iRobot. iRobot, to maybe make it more clear, is known for its pioneering work in the home robotics sector, occupies a distinct niche that Amazon has yet to enter. Critics suggest that the European Commission's rationale for blocking the deal is based more on speculative fears and assumptions rather than concrete evidence. So the decision not only raises questions about the Commission's priorities, but also threatens innovation, competition, and consumer welfare in the sector.
You mentioned in your... Oh, go ahead, please.
Additionally, it poses significant challenges to iRobot's financial viability, further complicating the regulatory landscape.
And actually, I think you may have just answered the question I was about to ask, which was, this was a big misstep on the part of the European Commission to block this. And I was going to ask what were some of the reasons why it wasn't a good idea for them to stop it. How popular is iRobot in Europe? I've seen the little robot vacuum cleaners in many homes in America. Is it likewise very, very popular and very common in Europe?
Yes, I think so. iRobot was one of the pioneers in this sector, and I think at least this is the case with Pulse. Everybody knows what Roomba is, so it's present.
So when they talk about anti-competitive behavior, I'm just curious what that entails. What would they look at and say this is a textbook case of anti-competitive behavior? If someone were to ask me to define what's anti-competitive, I don't think I could even begin.
One of the key arguments against blocking the merger was that Amazon and iRobot operate in different niches within the home robotics sector. iRobot operating in robot vacuum cleaners, while Amazon not yet entered this market. Therefore, the lack of this direct competition between the two companies suggests that Daisy's concerns are kind of unfounded. They suggested that those two companies merging together would kind of pose a risk to other players in the market. But as we can see, they are not exactly working in the same market.
Right. And you mentioned in your article that China actually is a big part of the global robotics sector. Again, I don't think a lot about, where is China in terms of robotics, but are they pretty fierce competition for these other robotics manufacturers out there?
Yes, certainly. They definitely are. And with the Amazon robot deal blocked, Chinese competitors in the global robotics sector stand to benefit. These competitors may now have a clearer path to dominance in the market, particularly given the increasing dominance of Chinese firms generally in the global robotics sector. So this outcome kind of runs counter to the EC stand objective to promoting fair competition and consumer welfare, as it may result in less diversity and choice for consumers.
It sounds like the decision by the European Commission is discouraging innovation. And I think you make a very strong case in your article that innovation is a good thing, but it can be tricky when your innovation can be stopped minus the permission of a bureaucratic body.
Definitely. This decision was a misstep. I argue that this was a misstep from one of these reasons, so that it could undermine progress in technological innovation. I think it hinders the development of companies in itself, discourages them to evolve.
One of the things you call for in your article is a more nuanced and evidence-based approach. And I'm wondering, can you give us an idea of what would that look like on the part of, for instance, European regulators?
I feel like regulators, rather than reflexively blocking deals based on speculative fears, should consider the broader implications for innovations, as we mentioned, competition, consumer welfare. And by fostering an environment that encourages investment and collaboration, regulators can ensure a more vibrant, more dynamic marketplace that benefits all stakeholders.
I'm trying to understand, at least from the standpoint of those regulators and members of the European Commission, why is it in their interest to be quick to say no? Does it just consolidate their control of power and authority, or is there something else that benefits them by wielding that ability? Maybe I could ask it this way. What's in it for them to say no as opposed to, well, that sounds like a good idea. Let's see how it works out. Do they have ties to, for instance, Chinese robotics firms or other competitors that they don't want to see facing competition?
To be honest, I am not so sure about that. And European Commission might have made kind of a rash decision because they were afraid of monopoly in the market. They were afraid of allowing a huge competitor, possible competitor, to be let in, like Amazon. And I feel like this was the main reason.
Okay. Thank you very much. We've got about 1 minute left here. I wanted to ask you about permissionless innovation. And I'm trying to remember, it seems like some time ago I spoke to Adam Thierer, who is a big proponent of permissionless innovation. And if memory serves, I think he may have at one time worked with the Mercatus Center. Is that a term you're familiar with, or are you fluent with that term, permissionless innovation?
Yes, I definitely did stumble upon it during my time at Mercatus, and I feel like it actually fits in here pretty well. This is an idea that individuals or businesses, companies should be able to innovate and create without an explicit permission from regulators or authorities. And I feel like EC's decision might be a good example of those authorities stopping this innovation to happen and to allow the company to evolve.
I have to stop you here because we are up against the clock. But again, we've been visiting with Martyna Smółka. She is a Young Voices contributor. And Martyna, thank you so much for joining us. Where can people find you on social media?
You can definitely follow me on LinkedIn, where from time to time I post about my work.